Ethiopia and Italy. By now, most of Africa was under the rule of European countries. Great Britain, France, Germany, Portugal, and Belgium had seized most of the continent for themselves. Only 2 African countries remained free from European rule. On the western coast, Liberia, a country formed by the United States as a home for freed slaves, had the right to govern itself. But Liberia was a protectorate of the American government, which meant that any time Liberia wanted to deal with another country, it had to get permission from the United States. So although Liberia wasn't ruled by another country, it wasn't truly independent. All the way across the vast Sahara Desert, on Africa's eastern edge, lay the country of Ethiopia, the only part of Africa that remained truly free. Ethiopia, filled with mountains and high plains, was sometimes nicknamed the Roof of Africa because it was so much higher than the lands around it. Right down the middle of Ethiopia runs a huge valley called the Great Rift Valley. And although most of Ethiopia is so high, the lowest land on the Earth's surface is also found in Ethiopia, at one end of the Great Rift Valley. Here the ground has thinned and sunk and thinned and sunk until it is 371 feet below sea level, so far down that lava boils just below the surface and bubbles up through the earth. This low place, called the Danakil Depression, is too hot for a normal thermometer. A thermometer would explode before it could register a temperature. The dirt itself is colored green and blue and orange by the minerals in the ground. One European, gazing into the Danakil Depression in amazement, called it the hellhole of creation. But most of Ethiopia, far from being a hellhole, was a prize that at least one European country was anxious to win. The Italian government had its eye on the only free African country. Ethiopia would soon have to protect itself against Italian invasion. But before the Ethiopians could face this threat, they had to solve a problem of their own. Their country had 2 emperors. One of these emperors, named Johannes IV, came from a northern part of Ethiopia called Tigray. The other, Menelik II, came from the center of Ethiopia, an area named Shoa. Both Johannes and Menelik claimed that by right he was the emperor of Ethiopia, the man who deserved the traditional Ethiopian title King of Kings. But Johannes and Menelik didn't dare start an open war with each other. Italy was hovering on Ethiopia's borders. Down south, Great Britain was growing stronger and stronger. Just to the west, the country of Belgium was greedily expanding its territory in Africa. If a civil war began in Ethiopia, with the Ethiopians spending their money and energy fighting each other, these European countries could just swoop in and take over. Both Johannes and Menelik had already tried to make alliances with different European countries. British soldiers had helped Johannes get rid of the Ethiopian emperor who came before him so that he could seize the throne. And Menelik had been buying weapons from both Italy and France. He even sent an Ethiopian Christian priest to these 2 countries to help him negotiate good prices for guns. Johannes and Menelik both knew that these alliances would make it easier for European countries to take control of Ethiopia. So, they made a deal with each other. They decided that Johannes would have the title King of Kings, but Menelik would get to be the king of the center of Ethiopia. And both men agreed to be allies and fight side by side if a European army invaded. During his rule as King of Kings, Johannes managed to fight off an Egyptian invasion of Ethiopia, keeping his country free from the control of the Egyptians to the north. Meanwhile, Johannes and Menelik ruled their own territories. They were polite to each other. They plotted against each other while trying not to get caught. They made deals with Italian and British army officers in order to get more weapons, and each one hoped that the other would drop dead. In 1889, Menelik got his wish. Johannes IV led his soldiers into battle against invaders from the west and was shot. As he died, he whispered, "Make my son king." Menelik didn't have any intention of allowing Johannes' son to become king of kings. Instantly, he declared himself emperor. Johannes' army, which had fallen apart after Johannes was shot, was too disorganized to prevent him. Menelik began his reign by trying to protect his country from the Italians. Only months after Johannes IV died, Menelik made a deal with the Italians. He promised them that they could take a tiny coastal area as an Italian colony as long as they agreed to respect Ethiopia's independence. But Menelik had been tricked. The treaty he signed with Italy had two different versions. The version written in Menelik's language said that if he wanted to, Menelik could ask Italy's advice on dealing with other countries. But the version written in Italian said that he had to ask Italy's permission before dealing with any other country. This treaty had turned Ethiopia into a protectorate of Italy. It would make Ethiopia like Liberia, a country that wasn't truly free. The Italians sent copies of this treaty to Great Britain, Germany, and Belgium in order to prove that Italy now controlled Ethiopia. When Menelik appealed to Queen Victoria of England for help, she refused to deal with him because the European countries had agreed not to interfere with each other's territories. Menelik had only one choice. He had to go to war to reject the treaty. The Italians assembled their soldiers on the coast that Menelik had given to Italy as a colony. They marched into Ethiopia, not expecting much opposition. The whole Italian army had less than 15,000 men in it, but Menelik was ready for them. He had already traded African ivory to European gun dealers in exchange for modern weapons. Now he used these weapons to arm his own soldiers and assembled an army of over 100,000 men. When the Italians met the Ethiopians at a mountainous place called Adowa, they were horrified to see that they were outnumbered more than 5-1. They had such bad maps that they didn't know where to hide or how to get away from the huge Ethiopian army. And as the battle began, a huge rainstorm poured down and confused the Italians even further. Almost 3/4 of the Italian army was killed. The others fled. Menelik's men began to chase them, but Menelik called them back. He allowed the Italian survivors to return to the coast. Menelik knew that the Italians would be too embarrassed to attack again. They were. In fact, the Italian government in Rome agreed to sign a real treaty recognizing Ethiopia's independence. Menelik also convinced Great Britain and France to sign similar treaties. Now all three of these countries would watch each other. If Italy, Great Britain, or France tried to invade Ethiopia, the other two would stop it, because none of these countries wanted any of the others to gain any more power in Africa. The Battle of Adowa in 1896 proved to be the only time that an African country was able to fight off European invaders. Alone in Africa, Ethiopia had kept its power, and Menelik II had earned the title Lion of Africa.